Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I go through Doctor Who from the very beginning. And after a prolonged period of time, probably about 2 months, where I've put a pin in the marathon and ended up sort of like commenting on new Doctor Who content, which is, it's great that we've got new Doctor Who content. It's time to get back to the marathon, and you join me as we hit, finally, the Web of Fear. The very first time I conducted a marathon, and consequently the first time I ever watched it, The Web of Fear shot straight up to the top of my list. Even with 5 episodes missing, it became my favourite story and therefore the one I most wanted to see returned. When it eventually showed up with The Enemy of the World, even though that story came back in its entirety, it was this one that I was, giddier about watching. This was the one of the two I wanted to see more. So when I did, it was an odd feeling. The Enemy of the World was such a uniquely great experience that maybe expectations had ruined it for me. And I found The Web of Fear not as enjoyable. Not just in comparison to The Enemy of the World, but to the previous times I'd watched The Web of Fear, which of course hadn't really been watching it. So I was curious to see what would happen this time around. Now, that isn't to say that I was bitterly disappointed with it on that first viewing and screamed at it going, where have you been all this time now? Now you come back and this is what you've turned into? I didn't do that because, listen, I still thought it was a great story, done very well. It's just that it didn't quite compare to The Enemy of the World. The Enemy of the World was such a revelation that this one sort of like turning out to be pretty much what I expected just couldn't really compare as an experience. But this time, maybe again, expectations have been tempered, both with having seen Enemy of the World now and this one, last time around on the marathon, that maybe I sort of like, it's not a case of being in check, but The Web of Fear, I think I've come to terms with the fact that I do these days prefer The Enemy of the World and a few other stories. But because there's now no disappointment, like there was a slight pang the last time, there's no disappointment anymore with The Web of Fear. It's gone back to being like an absolute classic. Easily one of the strongest examples of Season 5's template, if not the strongest, because lest we forget, Enemy of the World doesn't really follow the Season 5 template. If you take this template that Season 5 is almost a cliche to say that Season 5 is, The Web of Fear, easily the best proponent of that Base Under Siege, Monster of the Week, Season 5 story. As the quickest rematch the Doctor has had yet, with only 2 stories separating it from its sister The Abominable Snowman, it succeeds in a variety of ways. Firstly, it's way better than that first encounter with the Great Intelligence, actually becoming one of Doctor Who's very best sequels in the process, and also it wisely revisits one of the principal characters of that last story rather than just the monsters. By doing this, it grounds the Doctor's life and travels in a way that we haven't really seen before. In that, it examines the idea of meeting somebody that they only met a few weeks ago to us, and presumably them, but 4 decades ago for that character. That is very effective, and Watling Sr. really seems to relish this, adding layers to his performance as Travers to create that sort of like slightly different character that 40 years would chisel into a person. He's very considered, and he is in no small part responsible for this element of the story working, and therefore the story as a whole working as well as it does. Unfortunately, I'll still never get on board with the Yeti as a good Doctor Who monster. I know they're one of the better remembered and more famous monsters, but I just don't see it. As a reconstruction, imagining them move menacingly through the atmospheric tunnels of the tube worked brilliantly. Seeing them do it presents the same problem I had with them in their debut. They're like teddy bears. They don't frighten me in the slightest. I mean, I am jaded with the Daleks, the Cybermen, the Ice Warriors and all as a long-term fan, but at least I can see why they resonated. But with the Yeti, I'm kind of left just scratching my head. Much better is the great intelligence itself, and once again I'd like to reiterate how much I can understand and sort of even approve of Moffat bringing it back without its cuddly Furbies. As well as the intelligence being a success, the location of this story very much helps. Episode 1 was always like so incredibly atmospheric that it managed to carry the subsequent reconstructions. When it came back and I was able to watch those following episodes, except sadly for episode 3, but watching those subsequent episodes without the sort of like images I'd conjured in my mind because of the fantastic episode 1, I think that also went some way into why I didn't connect with that very first proper viewing of the Web of Fear that I thought I was going to. And that probably then informed me feeling a little bit disheartened by it. Now though, like I said, all of that's gone and I can watch those subsequent episodes and I love them. It may not sit at the top of my list anymore, but I have to realise that that doesn't mean that the story itself isn't much cop, because it's still one of the very best Doctor Who stories ever, and it has, I'm going to say it, the very best opening episode of any Doctor Who story of all time. Douglas Camfield's direction is absolutely fantastic. I mean, obviously it's Camfield, but he's probably the main reason why I don't think the 6-episode problem is that much of an issue here, which is bonkers when you think about how limited the setting actually is, and sort of like how claustrophobic it is. It doesn't end up feeling repetitive, and even that's even stretched over 6 episodes. Your mileage may vary. Maybe you're watching this and going, actually Chris, the Web of Fear is literally just them saying back to the common room over and over and over again. I don't get it from that. I think the scripting and I think the performances and most certainly the direction keep it moving at such a pace that it doesn't feel as either as repetitive or as limited as it could. And to be honest, it's the setting of the London Underground that helps with that as well, because basically familiarity with London and its geography, this gives the story scale on exactly the same set. They're walking up and down exactly the same bit of tunnel. But if you're familiar with London and its layout, when they're saying where they're going, like, you understand that the characters are covering a lot of ground. And therefore the setting of this story is something of a masterstroke, because it allows that same section of set to be used, but also, like, obviously being in London a lot and living close to London, I'm familiar with where they're going when they're talking about it. It just works super well. Maybe not as well for somebody who isn't familiar with the geography of London. Basically, it opens this tiny set, it blows it open wide. Given their limitations, the production team have crafted something laced with a threatening and cold ambience, which is maintained by solid direction, pretty good script work, and, again, like I've said, winning performances. Where the last story had Griffin the chef, here we have Evans the coward. The man self-serving, willing to sacrifice people for his own survival, and just an utter toe rag, but he works brilliantly. I hate him in the way I'm meant to hate him, which means, as a character, I like him. As I do all of the supporting cast. I've already mentioned how valuable I think Jack Watling is as Travers. And Tina Packer, as his daughter, builds a really nice relationship with him. And she even gets to put Captain Knight in his place several times. And she comes out of this story really, really well. Even with her father at the hands of the intelligence, she still kind of resolves to get on with the problem at hand and help the Doctor sort it out. She is prime companion material. And had she joined the crew, would have had it in her to be a magnificent Barbara to Troughton's Hartnell. Different enough from Barbara in order to work incredibly well with Troughton, but enough like her to recall that brilliant dynamic that Jacqueline Hill had with Billy. There's another Pratt in the ranks as well, with Chorley, who is played wonderfully. That he's so slimy and invasive actually adds to the claustrophobia in the first half of the story. John Rollison has a nice tendency to invade people's personal spaces as Chorley, which is a great touch. There's no need for him really because we've already got our slime ball in Evans, but neither overshadows the other and both make the story feel populated but not crowded. And this in turn provides the necessary variety in a serial which again takes place in so few sets. And this TARDIS crew have coalesced into something very special indeed. Jamie and Victoria both have plenty to do and they do it really well, and they have forged a very, very believable friendship between the two of them. And Troughton's Doctor, as not like the third wheel, but as a third element in the trio, he's managed to build a very different relationship with each of them. And that means that any combination of them works incredibly well and is fantastic viewing, whether or not that's Jamie and Victoria, or Jamie and the Doctor, or the Doctor and Victoria, or all three of them together. They are a joy. And that means there's some fun interplay between the three of them, particularly in the TARDIS at the beginning where they're all eating sandwiches off paper plates. And one day, light refreshments in the TARDIS will come to look like they've come from a beach hut in the Bahamas. But here, it's like an endearingly more modest affair. The most notable guest star, though? Well, please welcome the first appearance of Alistair Gordon Lethbridge-Stewart. Clearly not expected to be the beloved regular he rapidly became, the Doctor and his dear friend actually meet for the first time off screen. This isn't exactly what one might call befitting for one of the Doctor's most enduring friendships, but when you consider the character of the man who will become the Brig, it fits perfectly. No fuss, job to do, come on then, chop chop. Even in his first story, it's clear to see why he returned and kept on returning. There's a key moment where the Doctor says that his ship can travel in time and space. Now, the reactions from everybody around are sort of like the derision. But Lethbridge-Stewart just kind of silences the dissent and says, can it get us out of here? This is a defining moment for the character, I think. It's not entirely unskeptical, but it's not dismissive either. And it's a small, lovely, wonderful moment, but I think it's crucial in the later relationship between the Brigadier and the Doctor. In such a densely populated story, things aren't allowed to get as dull as I found them in The Abominable Snowman, and while Season 5 may have the reputation of sameness, as I actually have accused it of myself in the past, one thing it has done so far, with the exception of the earlier Yeti story, is to use its 6 episodes, where it has them, to much stronger effect than previous seasons. There's always something else added later on to spice things up, and here it's the identity of the traitor. Cleverly, it doesn't let anyone escape suspicion, and there's even a point where it looks like it might be trying to make you believe that it's Lethbridge-Stewart. And not knowing that this character would go on to be one of the most enduring of all of Doctor Who, it legitimately could be. He is played so well by Nicholas Courtney that his sort of like stoic benevolence could easily be subterfuge. And I mean, yes, it could be Evans, given that we don't like him very much, and he keeps droning on and on and on about the fact that it definitely isn't him. Then it could be Chorley, given that, rather unlikely, he turns out to have survived against all odds. It could even be Anne. Packer imbues her with a kind of almost weird sense of being non-committal. Now, she could either be sort of steadfastly getting down to defeat the intelligence because what else can she do? Or she could sort of like be rather coldly glossing over the plight of her father because she actually is possessed by the intelligence. That it's Arnold isn't completely unexpected, but it isn't a cop-out either, and the denouement is actually rather satisfying, not least because something unique happens in it. Jamie saves the day and the Doctor is not happy about it. We understand why, of course, because the Doctor had a more permanent plan in play, but not having confided in his companions about this, they just seize their opportunity and end up winning the battle, if not the war. Easily one of the highlights of Season 5, and most certainly one of the highlights of 1960s Doctor Who. I might have had a slight wobble the last time I watched this story because the episodes coming back, maybe actually also compounded by the fact that episode 3 didn't come back, it didn't feel as satisfying an experience as The Enemy of the World most certainly did. And so I think I dinged it unfairly. This time though, I'm fully back on board the Web of Fear train, the Web of Fear tube. And I think the Web of Fear is absolutely fantastic. After 197 episodes, it's still nice to be kept on my toes. I know it's the debut of the Brig to Be, but as a character, Evans is such a success that I think I'm going to have to go with his. It seems like a big one, but the Yeti. How they became as prominent as they did on the basis of these two stories when the intelligence is actually a far greater concept and I think should be better remembered, I just don't really understand. And in episode 4, they even get the Cybermen music, so get your own theme tune, Yeti. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this stroll through the underground, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give it a like and share it around. I would be super grateful. And what do you think of the Web Affair? Is it an improvement on the Abominable Snowmen, or is it an inferior sequel? Does it make good use of its claustrophobic setting, or does it all just feel a little bit too limited? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you back here soon to bid farewell to Victoria. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you at the beach again for a base under siege, again by a weird substance. Again.